Somebody call a doctor.
I want a bigger logo. You can't handle a bigger logo.
G'day, this is the Dr. Branding Podcast. I'm your branding Dr. Frank. The surgery is open. Yep, we are. Let's answer our next patient's question today. Comes from Trevor in the UK. Trevor asks, I've just joined a company and they've given me access to their logos to use. Great. But what are all these file types they have? Like EPS and SVG. Basically, what should I use? Help a brother out. Trevor, let's do this. Let's help you out. Okay. All the files and no idea. I feel you there. I always have this conundrum when I do send out a big folder of files and wonder, am I going to confuse the hell out of my client? I do try and take them through a file suite of logos, especially at the end of engagement, trying to help them understand which file goes where, for certain use cases, what the different file types mean. And it can go straight over a lot of people's heads. I completely understand. This is my domain. This is what I should know, obviously. And I don't expect you to remember all of these things, but this should be an episode that you can come back to. Episode 17 is the file type episode. So maybe save this one, send it to a friend, put it in your inbox, save it to your notes. This might be a good one to keep for you, Trevor, for those of you listening to refer back to. So this is OMPNG. This is confusion over the right logo file to use in a desired context. OMPNG. Don't ask me what the acronym means. I think you might get the picture though. All right, prescription. What do we do? We've got a lot of file types. Yes, you're going to have a lot of file types and you probably need a lot of file types to work with. The prescription to solve OMPNG. Let's get into it. And I'm going to try and go through it sequentially in a way that should be an easy reference guide to look back at or listen to again and again and again, depending on how much you need to look back at this. Okay, let's start with what you've probably got in terms of the hierarchy of your folder structure, especially if you have a good branding services provider that folders their assets for you well. And for those of you branding designers out there, a good tool to do this, to export your logos, especially if you use Adobe Illustrator, is something called Logo Package Express. They're a great tool that integrates with a Illustrator to be able to export logos in this kind of folder format. Files all the files with the file names in the right folders for print, digital, and then all the different file types. I'm going to get into that. Those of you listening, Trevor, those of you listening, that might have just gone again, whooshka, straight over your head, but let's dive deeper. So the first thing you might see in your folder structure is the different types of logo assets that you've got. So you might have a full logo that might be like a horizontal version. You might have a vertical version. You might have something called a logo mark or symbol or something like that, which is just, say, like the McDonald's M, just that little symbol. And then you've got something like a word mark, which is like the McDonald's full word written out. So you might have those as separate files. And then you might have something like a tagline or a website address. That's another asset that someone's created for you. Other logo elements as well might be in there. You might have a very, what you call a responsive logo, which has different variations, which are very detailed all the way down to very simple little icons. So those are the kind of file types you're probably going to, or logo variations you're going to see first in folders, possibly, hopefully. And then from there, it drills down into two things. We've got then print and digital. Okay, so print is based on two different color formats. One will be CMYK and one will be Pantone. Now, CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. These are the print colors in most typical print machines. So your home printer, if it has color, or you go to a print shop and they, for their general prints, using a digital printer, it'll probably have CMYK print colors. And they're the colors you generally want to print with. Pantone colors, on the other hand, are known as spot colors. You might have heard of that, or PMS colors. And they are colors that are used in addition to CMYK on big, large factory printers, where there's a separate printer for each color. And usually there's 2 or 3 at the end that have what you call your PMS Pantone colors. And that's used for something called offset printing. And this is where you would do large scale printing, something like a magazine or a lot of leaflets or things like that. Newspapers use them, stuff like that, where there's specific colors that you need to use that are not yours. They're not owned by you, those specific colors, obviously, but they're much more specific ink pigments rather than cyan, magenta, and black. Overlaid colors that form the different hues that you get, that you see in terms of a print-based color. So obviously there's no red there, or there's no orange there. You know, you mix a combination of magenta and yellow, and you'll get some red in there, a bit of green and blue and black, and it'll make all the other different, cyan, not blue. Cyan is like a blue, magenta is more like a pink, and yellow, and then the K stands for black. I didn't get there before. But yeah, Pantone color will have a specific pigment, so you have much better color reproduction at scale for lower cost, so that you know that your colors are getting reproduced effectively. Typically as well, they're much more vibrant. What you'll find is if you have a digital color and you try and print it on with a print color, on a printer, it might be a lot more dull. So you have something that's very bright and saturated and vibrant on the screen, but then when it prints, it might look very dull. This is a conversion that happens from digital color to print color, whereas Pantone colors, for print colors especially, can maintain that, let's say, vibrancy if a certain color is chosen. Your designer, or you might have access to a thing called a Pantone swatch book. They're just a book of leaflets. It's kind of like going to a hardware store or a paint shop and seeing all the different color swatches that you can use to test on your wall to see what color you want to paint your wall with, things like that. But it's just in a fanned out swatch book that you can pick your colors, and it has the certain value. It's a certain code with a mixture of letters and numbers in some cases. And it's, there's many different types of colors, obviously, all the colors of the rainbow nearly. So that's print colors. Then we've got digital colors, and this is what you might know as RGB. This is what your screen has, be it your iPhone, be it your laptop, be it your monitor. Any screen you see is RGB color: red, green, and blue. Even your TV, red, green, and blue. They're your digital colors. So again, very vibrant, much more saturated colors, typically on screen, obviously, because you have light emitting through it. Whereas when it's print, the color goes seeping into paper, creates a much more duller color, typically depending on the color that you're working with. So things like really hot pinks or vibrant purples, very vibrant oranges, things like that can turn out quite dull sometimes when you go to print. So we've got RGB. We've also got a thing called hex. And if you have a brand guide, you might have your color values in there of RGB values. So red might have 50, blue might have 62, and green has 73. Or cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, same thing. There might be 50% cyan, there might be 2% magenta, there might be 40% yellow, and there'd be about 2% black. And I think, what would that color be? About like a green kind of color that would end up being. So you got those values. If you have your digital color, so you got the red, green, and blue, you then have you could have a hex code, which starts with a hashtag. And then you've got 6 digits and letters, like a combination. And these are used in something like Canva. You can go into something like Canva if you use Canva to create your social media posts or company presentations or something like that. And you can put in a certain 6-digit number combination value, which is your color, rather than them allowing you to put RGB colors in. It might just have that code that references to your RGB color. It's just a quick reference color value that you can put in, especially for digital use on your website, on Canva, maybe Photoshop or Illustrator, whatever you might use to design things. I think you can also probably do it on Word and PowerPoint too, or Keynote and Pages if you use a Mac, things like that. You would use the hex value as that easy reference value to plug in. Okay, so we've got print color, generally CMYK, Pantone if you need it. Most companies these days, especially smaller businesses, aren't really needing Pantone colors. If you're doing manufacturing for product packaging, you probably want Pantone colors in there. But again, it's only for when you do printing. Digital colors, RGB and hex, there are those values there. And when your file types that you'll get, you will get a CMYK file type and you will get an RGB file type, and you might get a Pantone color file type if it is required. You won't get a hex file type. It's the same thing as an RGB, just to clarify that one. Okay, so we've got the logo variations, then we've got print and digital. Okay, so that'd be the next folder within each of those logo variations. So say first column, maybe this way. Yep. First column, the logo variations, and then to the right of that, we've got digital and print. And then we go into all the different file types. Okay. Now let's explain different file types. This might, again, just go straight over your head, but please stick with me, especially if you're listening and you can't see my hand gestures or my facial expressions. I don't really have any visual aids here to show you. So you're not missing out if you're watching the video of this. If you're just listening to this rather than watching the video. Now we've got two different types of logo files in terms of its creation. I don't know how else to explain that better on layman's terms, but two different ways of a logo being a logo. One is vector and one is raster. Okay, and it's not Rastaman, it's not Jamaican, Caribbean file types versus some techie Uber German vector file. Okay, a vector file means infinitely scalable graphics. Okay, so these are based on shapes and points rather than pixels. So raster is pixels and vectors is shapes that can scale infinitely. If you want to scale a raster image, it will lose resolution and quality. The image will start looking all pixelated as you scale it larger and larger, especially if you print it really, really big. You go up close to a really big billboard and you'll probably see the little imperfections and you'll see the little individual color dots. But far back, you're not going to see that difference of all the different little pixels there. Okay, so vector, infinitely scalable, and this is what we want for a logo typically. We don't want a raster image logo unless you've got something that has an image within it, like a photo or something. Not very many logos nowadays have that. We've moved past those kinds of old style of logo, which had lots of detail, might have had other little elements in there that couldn't be vectorized, and the birth of computers obviously has brought about vector-based file types for logos especially, but we want a vector file type. That is the best format that we can work with for its longevity and maybe any editing if we want to change color for any certain purpose, maybe for like a charity event or whatever it might be, to change to a specific color. Or amend it in the future if there was any imperfections and things need to be slightly amended. You do have a working vector file that can be manipulated into the future. Okay, so vector file types. Now you might see these file types. So you've got the description of the file itself, and then the end of it you've got dot, and then you've got whatever the file that type is. The ones you've probably seen all the time are like .pdf or .jpeg or .jpg, maybe .png, or what else might you find, like .doc for a Word document, or .ppt or pptx, I think it might be now for PowerPoint, things like that. That's the kind of I think it's called the suffix of your file name. Okay, so stick with me here. Vector file types, The different ones you'll see most likely, if depending on the person that's exported these logos for you, you might see these ones. It might end in .ai, and it's not artificial intelligence. It stands for Adobe Illustrator, or .eps, .pdf, or .svg. So let's talk about each of those. .ai is a file type that's made in Adobe Illustrator. It can be opened, I think, maybe only with Adobe Illustrator. And the same applies for .eps as well. That can be opened in Adobe Illustrator, but can be opened in many other different programs, but most likely not the ones that you have if you're just a general computer user. It probably won't open in something like Word or PowerPoint. It might actually, but it probably won't. But this is those two file types, an AI or an EPS, or even a PDF vector. This person knows what they're doing when they're exporting, can be given to your print provider, or maybe an embroidery provider that might do like embroidery of a hat or a shirt or something like that. Typically, a printer is going to ask you for your EPS file most of the time. If you want to send AI file, you could do that. PDF, you could do it as well. So they're those ones. SVG is another vector file. And SVG is a little bit different. It can be opened in something like Adobe Illustrator, but it can also be opened in web, which is where it's mainly supposed to be used for websites. This is where you would have your logo in the top left-hand corner, or header bar and footer of your website. And it's a vector file that can be turned into code effectively. So you'll see the visual of the image, obviously, but it can be scaled to infinite size. But it means it's not a rastered image where the website has to load that particular image and pull the data of that image from your server that your website's connecting to. Sorry if this is really a lot of jargon, but the better way of doing it for a logo, for quick loading and things like that, is SVG as a format, as it's a code-based file, effectively. That's the best way I can describe it. So this is what you want to give to your website designer or developer. If they ask for your logo, please send them your SVG if you have it. The alternative to providing a website developer or designer is probably going to be a PNG file, but I'll come back to that in a sec. So those are your vector files, okay? So those are the ones you want to use for print. Obviously, they can be created in digital versions as well. Obviously, so both print and digital, but I'll tell you which versions work where in a sec. So there's vector. For raster file types, we've got ones you're probably going to know, which are .png, .jpeg. So there's the two that you're probably going to know, or it might be .jpeg or .jpg, either one of them for JPEGs. And then we've got .psd or .tif. So these are raster file types that you're likely going to see in your file formats for logos if they have been created as raster formats. Typically, you're probably just going to see PNG and maybe JPEG. If you get PSD, there's or TIFF even. Typically, they're for more your image files that you might have for other created assets potentially. But a PSD is a Photoshop file. So that can be opened in Adobe Photoshop and edited, and it might be a layered file that someone could work with. Again, this is something more for graphic designed elements rather than a logo. If you saw that in there, I'd be kind of questioning the designer maybe why there's a raster PSD for the logo, unless there's some kind of treatment to it that has some embellishments and beveling or something like that applied to it. Very, very low use cases, I would imagine, have PSDs. Same thing with TIFF as well. Again, a TIFF can be a file that is a flattened graphic, a flattened raster image that can have a transparent background applied. And that is very much the same as a PNG as well. where you could have a transparent background applied to your logo, which is the most ideal format that you'll probably use in most cases for day-to-day use, especially in your own documents. So if it's a Word document, PowerPoint document, on your Canva, for your social media posts, your email signature even, things like that, where it'll have a transparent background rather than a white background or a solid color, let's say. You might have a logo that is like a square shape or a rectangle shape, and that dismisses everything I'm about to say about JPEGs here. But if you have, say, a circle logo and it's saved as a JPEG, what's going to happen is the image is going to be a square with a white background, and your logo is going to be in the center. So my logo, G'day Frank, is a circle and a pink circle with the letters GF in it. Around the outside, if I save that logo as a JPEG, we're going to get a square with a white background. And that's not what I really want. There's very minimal use cases where you would want a JPEG file. Don't ever send one to a designer. They're not going to be happy with a JPEG file in most instances for your logo. A PNG is a better bet, or even an EPS, and they can export their the right file that they need at the time. Okay, so there's a little hint for you. If in doubt, either send a PNG or an EPS, and a designer will know what to do with those two file formats very easily. So that's PNG, JPEG, PSD, and TIFF. Okay. Now, when to use each of these PNGs and JPEGs, again, something like your social media, your day-to-day things, PSDs and TIFFs, I would be giving those to a designer. For things like AI and EPS and PDF, they can be sent to a printer. For SVG, that can be sent to your web person and used for your website. And based on all those file types for both vector and raster, I hope you're still with me here and aren't bored to tears. We've got digital file types and we've got the print color file types. And there's a bit of a difference in some of these where some aren't like the other. So for digital file types, you can have for vector versions, you can have AI, EPS, SVG, and PDF. And for raster types, we've got PNG, JPEG, PSD, and TIFF. So pretty much all of them for JPEG. Sorry, for JPEG. For RGB, there's a lot of acronyms in this. For print colors, it's a little bit different, and we can only do a certain amount of file types for print use. They are AI and EPS and PDF. So we lose out SVG. SVG is just for digital use. And then we've got for raster file types that can hold CMYK color in the file itself. That's a bit of a technical way of describing it, maybe, but the best way I can do it in layman's terms, PSD and TIFF are the only logo files you could really have that are in CMYK. We can't save CMYK PNG, and you could save a CMYK JPEG, but you really wouldn't, because you wouldn't go off and print that in a way that's all that meaningful, I don't think. So in most print cases, you really are just going to have AI, EPS, and PDF to work with, or only just one of them, which might be EPS, and that's all you really need, to be perfectly honest with you. But as I said before, most of the time, if in doubt, find the .png file or the JPEG file. Now, the one thing I haven't mentioned throughout all of this is that those logo variations that you have, depending on your logo, a designer might have made different colorways. Okay, so you might just have one color and that's it for your logo. Kind of like McDonald's M is just the one yellow color. It is now, yep. But you might have other variations. You might want a white version. You might want a black version. You might want maybe an inverted color where you have your logo mark, the symbol is, let's say, green. At your word mark, the word of the name of your brand is just in black. But for uses on white, that works. But for uses on a black or dark background, that doesn't really work, because you then lose the logo as the logo's word mark. So we'd want an inverted version where we have the logo's word mark in white and still keeping the symbol in green, or you might want an all-white version. So these are the different colorways that a designer might give you, and that would come before you get to print and digital. Okay, so you'd have the different logo variations, the different formats in terms of the look of it. So we've got either, say, a horizontal full logo or a vertical or a horizontal. Logo mark, word mark, tagline, or web address. And then you would have the different colorways. And then you would have the print or digital. And then you would have the different file types for both print and digital for that color variation and colorway. If that made any sense, if you're followed with me throughout all of that, hats off to you. You deserve a prize. I'd give you a piece of brand candy if you were here in person, but the best I could do is give you my brand candy resource at the end of this. I'll come back to that on the outro. But look, Trevor, I hope that helps in some way, shape, or form. It can be very much confusing in terms of which file type to use and where and what context. But I would say this for any business owner or the person within a business that has to deal with the assets like logos, not knowing what to use where, is ask a designer. They're your best friend in terms of this, the designer especially that made it. I always make a point of saying this to my clients before we end an engagement to say, if you ever have a question about what file type to use where, just send me an email, send me a message on Instagram or wherever you find me, maybe LinkedIn or something like that, and just say, Frank, please help. I've got this context I want to use it in. I want to put it on an umbrella. What file do I give them to use in this context? All we need to know is what the background color is and if it's going to get printed and maybe even what the printer is asking for. That's pretty much all the information we'll really need. And we're probably going to give you something like an EPS file that's in full color or just white or whatever it is. And we'll know what to do and send you the right file, and away you go. So that might help you. That might help take the pressure off and give you a bit of a prescription to not have to worry about what file's what and where to use it and getting confused with the myriad of files, because it can be hundreds and hundreds of files depending on the logo that you have to work with. So I appreciate the ailment that needed to be treated there. Trevor, thank you for asking that question. And for those of you listening, I do hope that helps you too. As I said before, please take a piece of brand candy. This is my free resource guide to do better branding that you can get on your way out at g'dayfrank.com/candy. You can also make an appointment like Trevor via that link if you have a brand related ailment that you'd like some help with. I'll see you at the next appointment in my next episode. Bye everyone. Thanks for listening. The surgery is now closed. The Dr. Branding Podcast is hosted by Reagan Frank McCrill, that's me, and for legal reasons I want to be clear that I am not a registered or qualified doctor. The premise for this podcast is that it is a satirical analogy for branding consultancy to help others with their brand success. This podcast is also sponsored by my branding business G'day Frank. Say G'day today by booking a call with me at g'dayfrank.com.